Noah Bennett had always been the kind of person who planned everything carefully. His schedule was organized down to the smallest details, from the hours he spent studying literature to the notes he prepared before every lecture. At 24 years old, he was a graduate student at a university in Massachusetts, focused on building a future through hard work and patience. Romance was never something he considered a priority. Between research papers, assignments, and long evenings surrounded by books, Noah had convinced himself that feelings could wait. There was comfort in control. There was safety in knowing exactly what came next. But sometimes life had a way of changing the story without asking permission. Ethan Caldwell was the last person Noah expected to see outside the familiar walls of the university. To Noah, Ethan was the respected literature professor whose calm voice could turn even the most complicated novels into something unforgettable. He was known for his intelligence, professionalism, and ability to inspire students. In the classroom, Ethan seemed like someone who always knew what to say. He carried himself with confidence and quiet authority, creating a distance that made everyone admire him, but few truly understand him. Noah had always seen him as a person who belonged in a world far different from his own. That changed during a small gathering with friends after the end of a difficult semester. Away from the classroom, Ethan was different. He was not standing behind a desk explaining classic literature. He was simply a man enjoying a quiet evening, sharing stories, laughing at simple jokes, and revealing a side of himself Noah had never imagined existed. For the first time, Noah saw the person behind the title. The conversation between them felt surprisingly natural. They talked about books, dreams, and the strange moments in life that people rarely share with others. Noah discovered that Ethan also enjoyed quiet mornings, old bookstores, and the feeling of finding meaning inside forgotten stories. The night passed faster than either of them expected, leaving behind a memory neither was prepared to understand. The next morning, Noah opened his eyes and immediately realized something was different. Sunlight entered through unfamiliar curtains, and the quiet room around him forced memories of the previous evening to return. Then he noticed the person standing nearby, Ethan Caldwell, his professor, his respected teacher. The same man who had spent months discussing literature in front of a classroom was now standing in an ordinary apartment, looking just as surprised as Noah felt. For several seconds, neither of them knew what to say. The silence was not uncomfortable because of what had happened, but because they suddenly had to understand what it meant. Ethan looked toward the table where 2 coffee cups waited beside a stack of books. Noah looked at his jacket folded neatly on a chair. Everything felt strangely normal, yet nothing felt the same. "This is unexpected," Ethan finally said with a small, uncertain smile. Noah could only nod. The person he thought he understood was suddenly someone completely new. The most surprising part was not the awkward morning. It was the realization that behind the role of teacher and student were 2 people who had found a connection neither of them had planned for. And as they quietly began putting their things together, Noah wondered if this was just a strange moment they would both try to forget, or the beginning of a story neither of them saw coming. The morning after Noah Bennett realized who was standing across the room, everything felt strangely unreal. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sound of coffee being prepared in the kitchen. Noah sat on the edge of the chair, looking at the books stacked neatly on the table and trying to understand how an ordinary evening had become something he would remember forever. Ethan Caldwell moved with the same calm confidence Noah had seen countless times inside the university, but now there was something different. Without the classroom, without the title, without the distance between professor and student, Ethan seemed more human. He seemed like someone who also did not know what to say. "I think we should talk," Ethan said gently. Noah nodded, even though his thoughts were moving faster than he could organize them. He expected the conversation to feel uncomfortable, but instead, it was surprisingly honest. Ethan admitted that the situation was unexpected for both of them. He did not want Noah to feel pressured or confused. He wanted them to understand what had happened and make sure they were both comfortable moving forward. Noah appreciated that more than he expected. He had always admired Ethan because of his intelligence, but this was the first time he noticed his kindness. While they talked, Noah saw small details he had never noticed before. The old books on Ethan's shelves, the handwritten notes beside his desk, the simple coffee maker in the corner of the kitchen. These small things revealed a person who was much different from the image everyone had created of him. Ethan was not only the professor who stood confidently in front of a classroom. He was someone who enjoyed quiet mornings, meaningful conversations, and stories that carried emotional truths. After a while, the awkward silence slowly became something more comfortable. They laughed about how strange the morning felt and how neither of them knew the correct way to act. Noah carefully folded his clothes and placed them beside his bag, while Ethan organized a few books on the nearby shelf. It was such an ordinary moment, yet somehow it felt important. They were not hiding from the situation. They were simply two people trying to understand what came next. Before Noah left, Ethan reminded him that things at the university would remain professional. Their responsibilities mattered, and they both understood the importance of respect and boundaries. Noah agreed, even though a small part of him wondered if they could truly return to the way things were before. When Noah walked back across campus later that day, everything looked familiar. The same buildings stood in the same places. Students walked between classes. Professors carried their coffee through the halls. But Noah felt different. Every time he passed the literature department, he remembered that Ethan was not just the person behind the lecture desk. He was someone with dreams, memories, and feelings of his own. Ethan also found himself thinking about Noah. He wondered why a simple conversation had stayed in his mind all day. He had spent years keeping his personal life separate from his professional world, believing that was the safest choice. Yet Noah had reminded him that connection could appear in unexpected ways. Both of them decided they would move forward carefully. They would act as though nothing had changed. But deep down, they both knew something had changed. The morning had started with uncertainty, a few quiet moments, and two people awkwardly folding their clothes while trying to understand what happened. But by the end of the day, they were left with a question neither of them could ignore. Was this just a moment they would eventually forget, or was it the beginning of something neither of them had planned to find? For the next several days, Noah Bennett and Ethan Caldwell tried to return to their normal routines. At least, that was the plan. Noah attended lectures, worked on his research, and spent long hours in the university library surrounded by books and quiet conversations. Ethan continued teaching literature classes, standing in front of students with the same confidence and professionalism he had always shown. From the outside, nothing had changed. But for Noah, everything felt slightly different. Every time Ethan walked into the classroom, Noah noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The way he paused before explaining an important idea. The way he smiled when students discovered a new perspective. The way he carried himself with calm patience. Before that morning, Noah had only seen Ethan as a professor. Now he understood there was a person behind that role. Ethan noticed the change too. He became aware of Noah's thoughtful expressions, the questions he asked during discussions, and the way he looked at stories with deeper emotion than most students. Noah had always been intelligent, but Ethan began to see something more. He saw someone who cared deeply about understanding people and the hidden meanings behind their experiences. Still, both of them knew they had to be careful. Their situation was complicated, and respect mattered more than their unexpected feelings. Ethan kept a professional distance in class, and Noah focused on being the student he had always been. But distance did not erase the memory of their conversation or the connection they had discovered. One afternoon, Noah stayed late at the library to finish a paper about classic literature. He struggled with a section that required him to explain the emotional choices of a character. After several attempts, he finally closed his notebook in frustration. Sometimes I think understanding a story is easier than understanding people, he quietly said to himself. A familiar voice answered from nearby. That might be because people do not always follow the rules that stories create. Noah looked up and saw Ethan standing a few feet away. He immediately became nervous, but Ethan simply smiled. He explained that he was there to return some research materials, not to interrupt Noah's work. Their conversation remained respectful, but it felt easier than before. They talked about books, ideas, and the reasons certain stories stayed with people long after they finished reading them. Noah realized that Ethan was not trying to create distance because he did not care. He was trying to do the right thing because he cared. That understanding changed the way Noah viewed him. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his office, looking through old notes from years of teaching. He had always believed that keeping emotions separate from his responsibilities was the best way to live. It gave him stability. It gave him control. But Noah had reminded him that life was not only about control. It was also about connection. Meanwhile, Noah walked across campus beneath the evening lights, thinking about how one unexpected moment had changed the way he saw someone he thought he already knew. The hardest part was no longer the awkwardness of that morning. The hardest part was accepting that the person he wanted to understand most was the one person he had to carefully keep at a distance. Neither Noah nor Ethan knew what the future would bring. They only knew that pretending nothing had changed was becoming more difficult with every passing day. The story between them was no longer about one unexpected morning. It was becoming about two people discovering who they truly were beneath the roles they had spent years carrying. The weeks continued to pass, and Noah Bennett slowly began to notice that the hardest part was not avoiding Ethan Caldwell. The hardest part was realizing that he no longer wanted to. Before that unexpected morning, Noah had always believed that admiration was enough. He admired Ethan as a professor, as a writer, and as someone who seemed to understand the hidden emotions inside every story they studied. But now Noah had seen the person behind the carefully maintained image. He had seen the quiet moments, the thoughtful pauses, and the kindness that existed beyond the classroom. Ethan was not simply the professor who stood at the front of the lecture hall. He was a person with his own hopes, memories, and uncertainties. One afternoon, Noah visited the campus bookstore to search for a rare collection of essays for his research project. As he reached for a book on the upper shelf, he noticed Ethan standing nearby, also looking through the selection. For a moment, both of them paused, unsure whether to speak. Then Ethan smiled slightly. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. Noah relaxed. "A collection of essays about modern interpretations of classic literature." Ethan nodded and helped him find the correct section. Their conversation stayed focused on books, ideas, and academic topics, but Noah noticed something different. Ethan seemed more comfortable than before. There was less distance between them. Not because they forgot their responsibilities, but because they were slowly learning how to understand each other. As they talked, Noah discovered small details about Ethan's life. He learned that Ethan enjoyed visiting quiet coffee shops on Sunday mornings, collecting old hardcover books, and taking walks through the university gardens when he needed time to think. These simple details surprised Noah because they reminded him that even people who seemed confident and accomplished had ordinary moments too. "Everyone thinks I always know exactly what I am doing," Ethan said with a small laugh. "But most of the time, I am just trying to make the best choice I can." Noah looked at him carefully. Those words felt important because they showed a side of Ethan that few people probably noticed. The professor who seemed completely certain was also someone who questioned himself. Later that week, Noah attended one of Ethan's lectures. The topic was about characters who struggled between responsibility and personal desires. As Ethan explained the material, Noah realized that the lesson felt strangely familiar. It was not just about fictional characters. It was about real people trying to understand what they should do when life becomes complicated. Ethan never looked directly at Noah for too long, and Noah appreciated that. The respect between them mattered. But there was a quiet understanding that existed beyond words. After class, Noah stayed behind to ask about his research paper. Ethan reviewed his notes and offered suggestions like he always did. Yet this time, Noah noticed something different. The conversation felt less like a student speaking with a teacher and more like two people sharing a meaningful discussion. That evening, Ethan sat in his office after the campus had become quiet. He looked at the books surrounding him and thought about how easily people created ideas about each other. Students saw him as a source of knowledge. Colleagues saw him as someone dependable. But Noah had somehow noticed the person underneath all those expectations. Meanwhile, Noah walked home carrying the book Ethan had helped him find. He realized that the most unexpected part of their connection was not the unusual way they met. It was discovering that the person he thought was impossible to reach was actually someone who had been waiting to be understood too. Both of them continued moving carefully, respecting the boundaries around them. But with every conversation, every shared idea, and every quiet moment, the distance between them became harder to ignore. They were no longer just two people trying to forget an unexpected moment. They were two people slowly discovering the truth behind the roles they had always carried. The days that followed brought a quiet change that neither Noah Bennett nor Ethan Caldwell could fully explain. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no sudden promises or impossible decisions. Instead, their connection grew through small moments that seemed ordinary to everyone else, but carried a deeper meaning for them. A short conversation after class, a shared opinion about a book, a simple smile when they passed each other on campus. Those moments slowly became reminders that something between them had changed. Noah found himself paying attention to the details of Ethan's personality. He noticed how Ethan always stayed a few minutes after lectures to answer questions from students who needed extra help. He noticed how carefully Ethan chose his words when discussing difficult topics. He noticed that behind the reputation of being a serious professor was someone who genuinely wanted people to feel understood. One afternoon, Noah visited Ethan's office to discuss a research project. The conversation began like any other academic meeting, with notes, references, and questions about literature. But as they continued talking, the discussion moved beyond the assignment. "Do you ever wonder why certain stories stay with us?" Noah asked. Ethan looked thoughtful. "I think the stories that stay are usually the ones that reveal something about ourselves." Noah smiled. "That sounds like something you would say in class." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe that is because I spend too much time thinking about books." Noah looked around the office and saw shelves filled with novels, handwritten notes, and old editions that clearly meant something to Ethan. It was a glimpse into a world Noah had never seen before. The office was not just a place where Ethan worked. It was a reflection of who he was. Someone who valued memories, emotions, and the quiet power of stories. As the semester continued, Noah began working on a major research paper. Ethan offered guidance, but he also encouraged Noah to trust his own ideas. That surprised Noah. He expected advice from a professor. He did not expect someone to believe in his perspective so strongly. "You have a unique way of seeing things," Ethan told him. "Do not be afraid to use your own voice." Those words stayed with Noah. He had spent years trying to meet expectations and prove that he was capable. Ethan was the first person in a long time who reminded him that being himself was already enough. At the same time, Ethan was experiencing something he had not expected. He had always believed that keeping emotional distance was the responsible choice. His career mattered. His reputation mattered. The trust between a teacher and student mattered. But Noah made him realize that understanding someone did not always mean crossing boundaries. Sometimes it simply meant recognizing the impact another person could have on your life. One evening, after a long day at the university, Ethan stopped by a small coffee shop near campus. He was surprised to see Noah there, reading a book at a corner table. For a moment, they both hesitated. Then Noah smiled and invited him to sit. They talked about literature, childhood memories, and the dreams they had before life became complicated. Noah learned that Ethan once wanted to travel across the country, visiting independent bookstores. Ethan learned that Noah had always wanted to write something that could make people feel less alone. The conversation lasted much longer than either expected. When they finally left the coffee shop, the night air felt calm and peaceful. They walked in the same direction for a while, enjoying the silence without needing to fill it. Noah realized that the most meaningful moments were not always the dramatic ones. Sometimes they were the quiet conversations that showed someone who you truly were. Ethan realized the same thing. The connection between them was no longer only about an unexpected beginning. It was about two people slowly discovering that they could understand each other in ways they never expected. But as their feelings became harder to ignore, both of them knew that eventually they would have to face the question they had been avoiding. Could something so unexpected become something real while still respecting everything that mattered? Noah Bennett had spent the past few months trying to convince himself that everything between him and Ethan Caldwell could remain simple. They could continue their lives, respect the boundaries they had carefully created, and allow time to make the unexpected connection fade into a distant memory. At least, that was what Noah told himself whenever he noticed how much he looked forward to their conversations. But feelings were rarely as easy to organize as thoughts on a page. The more Noah learned about Ethan, the more he realized that the person he once viewed only as a professor had become someone much more important. Ethan had become someone who made him feel seen, someone who listened to his ideas and encouraged him to believe in himself, someone who noticed the quiet details that most people overlooked. Still, both of them understood the situation was complicated. Ethan carried the responsibility of being a professor. Noah was still a student at the university. Their connection could not simply ignore those realities. One afternoon, Ethan decided to have a serious conversation with Noah after reviewing his latest research work. They met in a quiet corner of the campus garden, a place where students often went to read or relax between classes. The autumn leaves covered the paths, and the peaceful atmosphere made the conversation feel less intimidating. "Noah, there is something we need to talk about," Ethan said calmly. Noah already knew what he meant. He looked down for a moment before answering. "I know." Ethan took a breath. "What happened between us changed the way I see you. But I never want you to feel like your work, your education, or your future could be affected because of me." Noah listened carefully. He appreciated that Ethan was thinking about his future before anything else. "I understand," Noah said, "and I do not want to make things difficult for you either." For a moment, they simply sat in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who understood the importance of the conversation. Ethan realized something about Noah in that moment. Noah was not impulsive or careless. He was thoughtful. He understood the situation better than Ethan expected. "You have grown a lot since I first met you," Ethan said. Noah smiled slightly. "Maybe because someone finally believed I had something worth saying." Those words stayed with Ethan. He knew Noah was referring to his encouragement with writing and research, but he also understood the deeper meaning. Noah had spent years questioning his own value. Ethan had simply helped him see what was already there. Later that week, Noah noticed a change in Ethan. The professor remained professional in class, but there was a quiet sadness behind his usual confidence. Noah wondered if Ethan believed creating distance was the only way to protect them both. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled with his own thoughts. He had spent years building a life based on responsibility and careful decisions. He was proud of his career and the trust people placed in him. But he also knew that avoiding every difficult emotion was not the same as living honestly. One evening, Ethan found himself looking through an old collection of letters and notes from former students who had thanked him for inspiring them. He realized that the reason he became a teacher was never just about sharing information. It was about helping people discover their own voices. And somehow, Noah had done the same for him. Noah had reminded him that he was more than his position, more than his reputation, more than the expectations others placed on him. The next day, Noah and Ethan met again. This time, the conversation felt different. They were not trying to pretend the connection did not exist. They were acknowledging it while still respecting what mattered. "I do not know what the future looks like," Noah admitted. Ethan nodded. "Neither do I." Noah smiled. "But I know I do not want to pretend you are just someone I forgot." Ethan looked at him quietly. "I do not want that either." It was not a perfect answer. It did not solve every challenge ahead. But it was honest. And for both of them, honesty was the first step toward understanding what their connection truly meant. The days after Noah Bennett and Ethan Caldwell finally admitted the truth to each other felt different, not because their circumstances had suddenly become easy, but because they no longer had to hide from their own feelings. They still moved carefully. Ethan continued teaching with the same professionalism he had always shown, and Noah continued focusing on his studies. The boundaries between them remained important, but the uncertainty that had surrounded them began to fade. They were no longer pretending that their connection was meaningless. They were simply learning how to handle something neither of them had expected. Noah noticed that Ethan seemed lighter than before. The professor who once carried every responsibility alone had started allowing small moments of happiness into his life. Sometimes it was a conversation about a book they both enjoyed. Sometimes it was a quiet walk across campus after a long day. Sometimes it was simply sharing a cup of coffee while discussing ideas that had nothing to do with assignments or lectures. Those simple moments mattered because they showed Noah that their connection was not built only on an unusual beginning. It was built on understanding. One evening, Ethan invited Noah to a small independent bookstore outside the city. It was a place filled with old novels, handwritten recommendations, and shelves that reached almost to the ceiling. Noah immediately understood why Ethan loved places like this. The bookstore felt peaceful, like a place where every story had a chance to be remembered. "I used to dream about opening a place like this someday," Ethan said while looking around. Noah smiled. "You never told me that." Ethan looked at the shelves. "There are many things people do not know about me." Noah understood that feeling. He had spent years keeping his own dreams quiet because he was afraid they were not important enough. That was something they shared. Both of them had learned how to appear confident while secretly wondering if they were truly understood. As they walked through the bookstore, Noah found a collection of essays about identity and personal growth. He opened one page and read a passage about how people often spend years becoming the person they think others expect them to be. He looked at Ethan. Do you think people ever stop doing that? Ethan considered the question. Maybe when they finally meet someone who allows them to be honest. The answer stayed with Noah. He realized that Ethan had become that person for him. Not because Ethan solved every problem in his life, but because Ethan encouraged him to trust himself. Later that night, they sat in a quiet cafe nearby and talked about the future. For the first time, they spoke openly about their hopes instead of only discussing their concerns. Noah talked about his dream of writing a book someday. Ethan shared his desire to create a place where people could discover stories that changed their perspectives. You know, Noah said, when I first met you, I thought you had everything figured out. Ethan laughed softly. I think everyone assumes that about people who look confident. And now? Noah asked. Ethan smiled. Now I think everyone is just trying to find their way. That simple answer captured everything they had learned. They were not perfect. They did not have every answer. But they were honest with each other. As the evening ended, Noah realized something important. Their story was no longer defined by the unexpected moment that brought them together. It was defined by every choice they made afterward. The conversations, the patience, the respect, the decision to see each other as real people instead of the roles they carried. Ethan looked at Noah and felt the same realization. Sometimes the most meaningful connections do not arrive when life is perfectly prepared for them. Sometimes they appear when two people are brave enough to acknowledge something unexpected and choose to understand it. For the first time, both of them stopped asking whether their connection could exist. They started thinking about how they could build something meaningful from it. As the semester moved closer to its final weeks, Noah Bennett and Ethan Caldwell discovered that the most meaningful changes in their lives were often the quiet ones. There were no dramatic moments that announced a new beginning. Instead, their relationship grew through trust, patience, and the simple choice to be honest with each other. Noah noticed that Ethan had started allowing himself to enjoy the small things he once ignored. He no longer rushed through every day, focused only on responsibilities. He took time to appreciate a good book, a peaceful walk, or a thoughtful conversation. Noah loved seeing that side of him because it reminded him that even someone who seemed completely confident could still be learning how to find happiness. Ethan noticed changes in Noah as well. The young writer who once questioned every idea he had was becoming more confident. Noah started sharing his thoughts more openly in class discussions and writing with a stronger voice. Ethan was proud of his growth, not because of his own influence, but because Noah was finally recognizing his own ability. One weekend, Noah and Ethan visited a small literary event in a nearby town. The event was filled with authors, readers, and people who loved stories as much as they did. Walking through the rows of books and conversations, Noah realized how much his life had changed. A few months earlier, he had been someone who believed he needed to carefully plan every step. Now he was learning that some of the best moments came from unexpected paths. Do you ever think about how different everything would be if we had never met? Noah asked while they looked through a collection of old novels. Ethan smiled thoughtfully. I think about it sometimes. But I also think some people enter our lives at the exact moment we need them. Noah looked at him. Do you think we needed each other? Ethan paused before answering. I think we reminded each other of things we had forgotten. That answer stayed with Noah. He understood what Ethan meant. Ethan reminded him that his thoughts mattered. Noah reminded Ethan that life could still surprise him. Together, they had helped each other see possibilities they had stopped believing in. Later that evening, they sat outside a small cafe with warm drinks in their hands, watching people walk through the quiet streets. They talked about the future without fear. Noah shared his plans to continue writing and exploring his creativity. Ethan talked about new ways he wanted to inspire students through literature. Their dreams were different, but they supported each other completely. The most important thing they had built was not based on one unexpected moment. It was based on the countless choices they made afterward. Choosing patience, choosing honesty, choosing to understand each other. As time passed, Noah realized that love was not always about finding someone who completed a missing part of yourself. Sometimes it was about finding someone who encouraged you to become more fully yourself. Ethan realized the same thing. For many years, he believed a stable life meant avoiding uncertainty. But Noah showed him that some uncertainty could lead to the most meaningful experiences. Near the end of the semester, Noah submitted his final research project. Ethan read it carefully and left a note at the end with only a few words. Keep telling your stories. Noah kept that note because it represented more than academic encouragement. It represented the moment someone believed in him before he fully believed in himself. As they walked across campus together after the final class, they looked back at the place where their unexpected journey had begun. They both knew challenges would still exist. Life would continue to change. But they also knew something important. They were no longer two people trying to understand an impossible situation. They were two people building something real, one thoughtful conversation and one ordinary day at a time. Months passed after Noah Bennett and Ethan Caldwell chose to stop running from what they felt and start understanding what they had built together. Life did not suddenly become perfect, and they never expected it to. They knew that meaningful relationships were created through patience, honesty, and the small decisions people made every day. Their connection continued to grow quietly, away from the dramatic moments that first brought them together. Noah completed his graduate studies with a confidence he had never felt before. The person who once questioned every sentence he wrote had become someone who trusted his own voice. He continued working on his stories, creating characters that carried the same emotions he had once struggled to express. Ethan remained proud of him, not as a teacher watching a student succeed, but as someone who had witnessed another person discover his own potential. Ethan also changed in ways he never expected. For years, he had measured his life through achievements, responsibilities, and expectations. He believed being dependable meant always having the right answer. But Noah taught him that it was also important to experience life, to accept uncertainty, and to appreciate moments that could not be planned. Their days became filled with simple memories. Weekend mornings spent exploring bookstores, conversations over coffee about books and dreams, quiet evenings when they sat together discussing the stories they wanted to tell. These moments were not extraordinary to the outside world, but they meant everything to them. 1 year after they first met, Noah returned to the same small cafe where they had once talked about their uncertain future. He looked around and smiled, remembering how different he felt back then. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Noah asked. Ethan smiled. "More often than you might expect." Noah laughed softly. "I remember thinking everything was complicated." Ethan nodded. "It was complicated." He paused and looked at Noah. But complicated does not always mean wrong. Those words represented everything they had learned. Their story was never about pretending challenges did not exist. It was about facing those challenges with respect and understanding. They had learned that people were more than the roles others gave them. Ethan was more than a professor. Noah was more than a student. They were two people who discovered each other beyond expectations. Years later, the university library still held countless memories of their beginning. The classrooms, the bookshelves, and the quiet campus paths remained reminders of how an unexpected moment had changed their lives. But their future was no longer defined by that first surprise. It was defined by everything that came after. On a peaceful Sunday morning, Noah sat near the window of their home, writing a new story while Ethan prepared coffee in the kitchen. Sunlight filled the room, and the familiar sound of pages turning created a feeling of comfort. Ethan placed a cup beside Noah and smiled. Noah looked up and smiled back. It was an ordinary moment, but they both understood that ordinary moments were often the ones people remembered most. They had started as two people who never expected to find each other. They became two people who chose each other every day. And as new stories waited to be written, they continued moving forward together, knowing that the most beautiful chapters of life were often the ones still waiting ahead.